Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Triangle Area SQL Server User Group's main meeting. This is our first main meeting of the year, certainly will not be our last, and we are glad to have William talking to us about Microsoft Docs. So please, take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to see everybody virtually, I guess. It's real nice to be presenting to you. I was just talking to Kevin about how 2 years ago at SQL Saturday Baton Rouge BI edition in February of 2020, we were all walking around like the speaker dinner, like trying to remember not to shake people's hands because this bug was going around and we didn't know how bad it was going to be. And man, that feels like a 2-year decade ago, right? Just how crazy it is that that was so long. So this presentation is how to become a contributor to Microsoft Docs. Give me 1 second. I got something to reconfigure on my side. The screen share. All right. There we go. Sorry, I had to duck underneath my microphone. All right. So introduction. Today's agenda. We're going to introduce the topic of Devrel. We're going to cover some tips and tricks about Microsoft Docs that you might not be aware of. Most importantly, how to contribute to Microsoft's open source Docs as code approach in GitHub, and what you need to do to become a contributor to the Docs. So the first thing you need to know is that you'll need a github.com account. It's free. If you don't have one already, you can sign up for one quick, and then you can get involved. You can give feedback, and if you find them, you can provide corrections. You can provide edits yourself to the Docs that the entire community uses. You might find this rewarding to your career, show your boss, impress your friends at parties, put it in your MVP activity reports if you get nominated or if you're going up for a renewal, put it in your personal brand, your blog, so forth, things like that. So throughout this presentation, feel free to add your questions to the chat at any time. Kevin will bring those forward as time allows, without any formality. We can be pretty informal and conversational here. I'm happy to field any questions that you have. So some introductions. My name is William Assaf from Baton Rouge. Now I live in Redmond and work for Microsoft for a little over a year now on the database Docs team. Internally, affectionately, this team is known as Rogue One because our boss's boss is a big Star Wars nerd. And when we're not violating multiple copyright laws with that nickname, we support tens of thousands of articles all about SQL Server, and a lot more, and basically the entire data platform, and I'll kind of go over that. So we work with the product groups and we work with the program managers for everything SQL Server, including all its various flavors in Azure, including Synapse, all the technologies under that umbrella. And we also cover all our data platforms tooling like Management Studio and Azure Data Studio. And we're called the Database Docs team, not just the SQL Docs team internally, because we also cover the open source Azure SQL databases or Azure databases for MySQL, MariaDB, and PostgreSQL, as well as Cosmos DB, which Azure Cosmos DB is, thanks to its APIs, like 5 different database platforms all in one. But we are just one content team. And today we're not talking about those databases, that technology specifically. Rather, we're talking about all of Microsoft Docs for all technologies. So we're talking about Windows, talking about .NET, we're talking about everything. So a bit, and I'll go real quick, a bit about the mission statement of the hundreds of employees of content and learning at Microsoft CNL. That's the division we're in. We have 2 missions. One, we want to enable students, job seekers, workers online with great content. Easy. 2, we want to build an active community of contributors. Well, that second goal is why we're doing this presentation. We want to communicate specifically how you can be a part of the quality Microsoft Docs experience. Now, Microsoft Docs are not Wikipedia. It's not open to all edits, but we do have hundreds of thousands of articles, and we want to embrace the wisdom in the technical community to help maintain a high level of quality and consistency throughout. So opening the Docs up to external contributors is part of our story of how we scale. I'll go through this quickly as well, I promise. So what is Devrel? Developer Relations. So Database Docs is one of many Docs teams in Microsoft's Cloud and AI Devrel team. So developer relations is the team in many companies that involves activities that connect developers and in-house manufactured goods and services with external users. So Devrel ensures that products establish a good continuous relationship with external developers through mutual communication. So this definitely involves documentation, how to call an API, code samples, things like that. Devrel and other companies might also look like community management, like issue reporting and triage, release notes, focus groups, public interaction. Your favorite video game has Devrel folks who send and receive communication with the public about bug reports and mods and discussion and patch notes and stuff like that, right? So Devrel folks are technical and we know the products well. And in fact, in some tech companies, they will cycle developers in and out of Devrel roles so that Devrel folks have a keen awareness of the technical detail, but also so that developers see how the end user consumes the products and communication. That's important. Finally, we think that Devrel is a strategic advantage for product teams because this type of outreach enhances adoption, provides authentic community engagement, and it goes way beyond marketing, way beyond social media. So in this way, Devrel is not marketing to CEOs and CIOs, it's marketing to you in the technical community directly. And there are all products out there that we have used and we continue to use them because we've had good documentation experiences or support experiences or because of an easy adoption or a learning curve, right? Think about that. So in the spirit of that authentic community involvement, let's dive in. We're talking a little bit about docs.microsoft.com. I want to give you a quick map around some specific features. I'm not going to walk through every link and everything in here, but some features that we have in here that you might not know of. So this save button right here allows you to save links in Docs to collections, to organize them into groups that might be specific to a project or a certification exam that you're working on. And you can save Docs to a collection alongside Microsoft Learn modules and Microsoft Q&A pages as well to gather all those materials that you have on the one topic into one place. Now you see two search boxes on the screen. The first in the top right searches the entire technology stack that you're in. So for example, all of Azure. Now on the left, that table of contents covers many different articles, and it's here that you can search the titles inside a different table of contents. And if you know what title you're looking for, like you know what DMV you're looking for in SQL Server, this is actually much easier to search this way probably. Now on the right, you'll see a navigation for the article itself, and all those links are clickable. Those article header links are linkable directly, and if you want to send a colleague a link to a heading specifically like deployment models for Azure SQL, you can hover over that heading. You'll see the little link graphic appear. You can click on that link or copy the URL, and you notice that it appends the anchor to the URL at the very top, right? And then in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see this download PDF option. Not a lot of people are aware of this. Not a lot of people need it either. You may have seen some communication that this download PDF feature was going away, that it was going to be disabled in the near future. Well, we got feedback on that. We got some really good feedback from the community and we listened. And so now those PDFs and the system that they're used to consume those will be delayed in its retirement. So it's going to be around for a lot longer. We do have a new system coming online for offline docs downloads in the future. So stay tuned for that. But for now, this functionality is not going away, but pay attention to some new features in this space. Okay. And again, Kevin, let me know if y'all have any questions. I know that doc stuff is kind of boring. We'll get to some more interesting stuff soon. Now, let's talk about the versioning and a little bit of the programming behind some of the docs that you see. So where it makes sense, the same document might include different information for different versions of the product mentioned. So we may have the same article, but for various versions in SQL Server, Windows versus Linux, or the different releases of SQL Server like 16, 17, and 19, or for different Azure implementations of SQL Server like Azure SQL DB or MI or Synapse or APS or just, SQL Server. This on the bottom left-hand corner screenshot is a code snippet of the Markdown, and all our docs are in Markdown. I'll talk about that some more, showing how one article might display different information depending on the version you have requested. Well, how do you know what version you have requested? It's not like this in all docs. It's only like this where that docs area has enabled this type of versioning. But in SQL Server, for example, you'll see this drop-down list. And so if a doc doesn't look quite right because of a version specific detail, take a look at the version that you're in, the version that you requested. A lot of times the version you get straight from a search engine may not be the version of SQL that you really are dealing with. It might be close, the information there, but it might not be right. So take a look at that. That version drop-down list also affects the table of contents. So if you're not seeing something in the table of contents, it might be because you're actually looking for a different product. Sometimes we'll handle versioning also inside tabs in the document, or we'll clearly state the versions in the applies to row, or we'll use colorful note boxes to call out like, hey, this section only applies to this or that. And a lot of times we use all of those things to make sure that you know what content applies to what. Also note that for content that's specific to much older versions of SQL servers, like before SQL 2016, we do still have ways to access that old content as it was at the time of its maintenance, even though some of those are through offline docs only, and I'll show you that in a sec. And while we do support content for all supported versions of SQL Server, just a reminder, a friendly reminder that SQL 2012 extended support ends this summer in July of 2022. So about 6 months away from the end of support for SQL 2012. Okay, so speaking of Management Studio, not a lot of people know this, especially if they didn't have a background as a developer, because Visual Studio has these same features. But when you have any text highlighted and you hit F1 in Management Studio and SQL Server Data Tools, or really anything that's a shell of Visual Studio, the browser should bring you right to the corresponding article for that word or that syntax that's been highlighted, for example. This assumes that your workstation has access to the internet and that you have selected the help preference of open in browser. But this should bring you right to a Microsoft Docs online article, in this case for the dynamic management view, sys.dm exec sessions. If you hit F1 on something that's highlighted and it doesn't bring you to a specific article, or it brings you to a different article or just like a landing page, that actually might be a Docs issue. And that's something you could help us fix. That's something you could file a GitHub issue for. We'll talk about that soon. So if your work environment is behind an air-gapped network, or if you work in like a high security environment, like a nuclear power plant or a government agency, military, stuff like that, you can download version-specific docs to your Visual Studio through Management Studio. In fact, some older versions, like the T-SQL content that is specific to SQL 2014, is only available offline. So I don't know how many of you work offline for help with SQL, but this is actually a pretty big strategic advantage for some of our customers against some of our competitors. There are some very large organizations, including the public sector and government, large private sector companies that are on top of the Fortune list, that want their development environments to be internal and secured away from the public internet with no internet access. I know it kind of sounds awful, but they have ways of managing that, I guess. So in the case of Microsoft's documentation for SQL Server, for Power BI, for Azure, for all sorts of other products, our documentation is all hosted in GitHub. And therefore, it can be easily cloned periodically, downloaded, and then rehosted internally so that those environments get the best of both worlds: secure network for developments and access to fresh product documentation. Some of our competitors will like try to deliver a whole bunch of screen scraped PDFs and images and stuff like that. Well, come on, much better. So docs.microsoft.com actually does have a feature for downloading those to PDF. Again, we talked about that earlier. That's really for one article. This is for the entire repository. So Kevin, are there any questions at this point before I move on?
There are no questions so far, but if you do have questions, put them in chat. We'll pass them along.
Cool. So how can you contribute to Microsoft Docs? So for documentation issues, you can use either GitHub Issues or you can use a GitHub pull request, just as if you were contributing to any open source project. Now, if you haven't contributed to any open source project, that's okay. I'm going to explain how you can do everything tonight in the browser with nothing to download and nothing to install. It's really that easy. You don't have to learn what a fork or a clone or a push or a pull or even a pull request is. We'll have an explanation later on how that all works. If you do work in GitHub, if you are familiar with Git and pull requests and remote repositories and things like that, you can do that too. And later, I'll talk you through how that process works behind the scenes. You might be really interested in that. But in the case of SQL Docs on the database docs team, not a lot of DBAs are familiar with Git. And that is not a problem. Anyone can help easily using the browser only. I even have a step-by-step tutorial at this URL here to guide you through the process of creating a pull request. And then by contributing to Microsoft Docs for any product or technology, not just SQL Server, you can be a part of the community and help edit docs that everyone uses. And we'll talk about the contributor designation at the top of the article. We average around 16 million page views a month. And you can get your picture up on the top of an article. And you can do this entirely through the browser if you want, again, with nothing to install. And so let me give you an inside sneak peek at the process behind Microsoft's Docs as Code approach. Content teams like ours across all the different technologies integrate with the product teams. We join their support reviews, their team meetings. We coordinate release schedules and conferences and everything. That's what I mean by Docs as Code. So let's walk through it.
So before that, there are a couple of questions.
All right.
The first one is probably the most important question of the night. Will highlighting with no lock and hitting F1 take you to a training class sign-up form?
Very good. I like it. I dig
it.
I'm going to work on that.
The other question, which I'm not sure if it's more serious or not, because that one's a very serious question. Is the same tooling used for online docs that we download directly from the site or that we used to?
Is the same tooling... okay, so for SQL 2014, that documentation is not maintained anymore, right? It's kind of in an archival status. For SQL 2016 and above, yes, everything we're talking about tonight is to help maintain content for SQL 2016 and above. And let's be honest, a lot of articles apply all the way back down to, before any of us had careers in this thing. The article on the select statement, for example, has been around for a very long time. If you want to view it as it looked like in 2014, that's what I mean by that offline content. Otherwise, we are maintaining those articles with these tools. I think that was the question. But
yeah, he was talking about from the download link where I know you'd shown download as PDF.
Right. So that's not super useful, right? That's like for a one-off. But yes, these tools are for, and I'm showing the 16, 17, 19 interface right here. But if you go to this URL on SQL Server offline documentation, you can get how to get access to the 2014 docs.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. I hope I answered that question. If I didn't, feel free to rephrase. So talking about docs and issues, how you can contribute, right? So what belongs in docs, issues, and pull requests? That's what PRs means, pull requests on GitHub. So to be clear, support issues, like you're having a problem right now, it's affecting production, that does not belong in documentation feedback. So the support options that we're talking about now, or the feedback options rather, we're talking about now are not support. They're not Microsoft support. There's no SLA and response time. If you're having a problem, unexpected behavior, an outage, contact Microsoft support or your support partner. We triage incoming issues and pull requests from GitHub. And if it sounds like you have a support issue, your issue will likely be closed with like a polite message and some links, stuff like that. Now, if it's about product issues, product feedback, like I think SQL Server should do this, and you just happen to be reading the article about that, that's actually more clearly addressed to the product teams and the engineers and the program managers via feedback.azure.com. Now, this is a brand new site in the last few months. You might remember Connect items in the past, like in the distant past. You might remember user voice items up until like a few months ago. Well, that has all been replaced by a new system hosted at feedback.azure.com. Now, most of those old ideas have been replaced by a new system, and they have been migrated. Though because of GDPR and privacy purposes, we did not necessarily have your permission to pull your name and your company and your email along with your issue. So comments from external users like you in the community have probably been masked, or those the users themselves have not been have been removed from the issue. So feedback.azure.com hosts support. Does not host support. It hosts product feedback channels for many Microsoft products, not just SQL Server. For SQL feedback, though, we have a AKA MS to go directly to the SQL channel for feedback, AKA MS SQL feedback. So Most docs issues. So that's support issues. Now we're talking about product ideas. Now we're talking about docs feedback, the reason for our presentation tonight. So most docs issues that will get attention are a request to fix something that's missing or outdated or wrong, or a request to add something that would have helped prevent an error or prevent a support ticket, right? So how do you do that? First, let's talk about GitHub issues. So let's say you've got an issue with documentation that you want to suggest. Think of this as just letting us know, hey, something's wrong here, go fix it. We have goals to address these issues in a timely manner, but we'll be honest, issues are triaged. Might take days or weeks to get a satisfactory resolution. Not all issues will eventually become a documentation change, but if it does, we'll let you know. To create an issue, you can use on most pages, not all, but on most pages, you'll see a gray box near the bottom that has submit and view feedback for this product or this page. The This Page button will bring you to a new issue screen. So you can throw your comments in here. Everything else has been filled out for you, like what article you were on, stuff like that. Give it a title, hit Submit New Issue, the green button at the bottom, and we take it from there. And if you weren't aware, by the way, GitHub has a dark mode. Now, I'm a huge fan of dark mode, so allow me to go off on a tangent here. Dark mode is actually very nice, especially if you like to work in a cave like I do. If you like to use dark themed apps and websites as much as you can. There's a couple of ways to change your theme in GitHub, but in your account settings, you'll see an appearance menu. You can have it automatically sync to your Chrome and Windows appearance settings for night and day automatically, or you can just set it to dark mode all the time, like all the cool kids do. Also, if you're an enthusiast for dark mode websites like I am, docs.microsoft.com has a dark theme too. Check out the footer of any Docs website right next to the language choice. You can select your theme. And dark mode has arrived for the latest version of Microsoft Word as well. And I hear it's coming soon to LinkedIn as well too. So that's all really good. Cool. Enough about that. Let's get back to Docs. Back to contributing. All right. Second option. We talked about issues where you just kind of just letting us know. GitHub pull requests is the option where you've got a documentation issue and you want to suggest the edits yourself. You can click on the edit button in the top right-hand corner of almost any article in all of Microsoft Docs. And that brings you to the GitHub page for that same article. Now you're actually viewing a preview of the article's markdown. Then you click on the pencil button, the little pencil icon, which is pretty much in the same place as the edit button was. And then you are looking at, pencil button. Now you are looking at the actual markdown code in a text edit box in the browser. You are editing Microsoft Docs here and live in the browser. So it might surprise you to learn that Microsoft Docs are not edited in Microsoft Word, rather in code in Markdown or in YAML. I won't really talk about too much about that, but Markdown is a lightweight text markup language created for formatting rich text in a plain text editor. GitHub has their own formal implementation of Markdown called GitHub Flavored Markdown. And many different online sites use Markdown for their content. So if you don't think you know Markdown, you might actually know Markdown already. So in addition to GitHub, GitLab, Reddit, Stack Exchange, Bitbucket, Drupal, all these different sites and a lot more use Markdown already. So you might be more familiar with basic Markdown syntax than you think. So you can scroll down, make your changes here. Again, if you're not familiar with Markdown, it's actually pretty easy to understand once you get rolling. You can kind of infer what bold and what a hyperlink format looks like. Don't worry about it being perfect from a formatting or style standpoint. We're always going to review that. Somebody on the content team responsible for that article is always going to review it, potentially tweak it to Microsoft standards for style, things like that, before it's merged live. There are plenty of online resources for basic Markdown syntax, but if you don't get something quite right, again, don't sweat it. Don't let that be a barrier. You can then use the preview changes feature to preview the Markdown formatting. It doesn't look exactly like it looks like in the Docs engine, but it's a good preview of the Markdown. You make sure you got a good sanity test. So once you've made your changes in the edit box, you can scroll to the bottom. Here you have a chance to commit your changes. So you can enter your pull request's title and some comments, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. And then you can give it a description. And in that description, you can use the hashtag ping MSFT docs. Just think of that as a way of waving hi to us, saying, hey, I heard about you on this presentation. We'll talk more about that later. You can also use that same hashtag on Twitter, LinkedIn, or whatever, just to say hi that, hey, I just got my first pull request. Some people have done that. It's not super popular, but whatever. If you're not familiar with GitHub terminology like pull requests, again, don't worry. You don't have to be. Look how easy this is. There's a single green button, right? Once you submit your pull request by clicking that green propose changes button, we'll take it from there. And we'll keep you updated as your pull request moves through the process. Your changes to the markdown of the file will be proposed for merge. They'll be triaged. They'll be reviewed by the article's author and other reviewers, including people on the product team, engineers, folks like that. The content team for the article will take it from there. We may reply to the pull request in the pull request's comments. We may ask you questions. We may make edits if necessary, and eventually your code may be merged in. You'll be notified along the way with an email from GitHub anytime somebody replies. Again, you can do all of this if you want through your own tooling. You can create your own fork of the repo in your account. You can create a branch. You can do commits. You can push and then do a pull request. That's what we on the content teams do every day when we go to edit docs. If you just want to use the github.com website, though, to handle the entire process for you and making edits to a single file, it's actually much easier to do it through the website. We recommend it. So here's what it looks like after you've submitted a pull request. Your pull request will start in the open status, but you can see this one is already merged. It's got that purple merged button in the top left. That means it's been accepted. It's been pushed into the preview repository, and soon it will be merged into the live production repository. I'm going to walk you through that whole process later on. You can see what GitHub did for you was to automatically, in the background, create a fork of the repo in your account, create a branch, and just calling it, patch and then an ordinal number. And here it created a branch in Hiroshi's name called just patch 297. And then the pull requests log that you can see down beneath that includes the commit, which I put in the red arrow there. That's the actual change, the commit to the markdown file. That's in the pull request log, along with many other comments, some automated, some manual. A single pull request can include many different changes from many different files. In this case, it was just one. The pull request log contains all those messages, conversation and notes from anyone who's been assigned and anyone who has replied to it. You'll receive an email anytime anyone uses your username with the @ symbol. And you can respond in conversation at the bottom here with somebody like me with that comment button. Once your pull request is created, both you and Microsoft can review the changes you're suggesting in the pull request in the Files Changed tab. And this will give you an in-browser differential. So the red line is the old code, the green is the new, and the changed characters are highlighted. And here we can see that what has been suggested is just a simple typo fix. Easy to approve. The asterisks for the bold were in the wrong place. In fact, you may find creating a GitHub pull request easier than trying to create a Git issue. If you're trying to describe how something should change, like, hey, there's extra asterisks in this table in the third row in Delta Store, I think the asterisk should be blah, blah, blah. Instead, you could just do a pull request that moves those two characters around. Very simple, easy to understand, and you get credit for it. Let's talk more about that. So simply making that change yourself is sometimes easier. Just don't want to provide that description. If you want to make more changes to the file, you can issue another commit. Just hit those three dots, hit the edit icon. You'll be back at the markdown. You can make another change. You can add that to the same pull request. Now you'd have two commits in one pull request. But then after you've submitted your pull request, you can sit back. We've got it from here. We'll give you a status update. And then, well, I'm going to talk about credit in the next slide. So there you have it. What's the most helpful to Microsoft? A pull request. What gives you contribution credit? Only a pull request. You do not get any credit. You don't get your little face at the top of the article just for an issue, only for a pull request. That's what we really want to see. So after your pull request is in, again, you can go to Twitter, say hi to us there with that hashtag. This is what it looks like. So if you've contributed via a pull request and we merge your commit into the document, you'll get your GitHub profile picture across the top. And the folks listed here in this list are folks both inside Microsoft and external to Microsoft that submitted commits to an article. You only get your name and logo on an article for a pull request. Again, not just for an issue. And these contributions can be evidence. They can be listed on your MVP application or renewal activity. And yes, I know those things are paid attention to, and they do look and see like qualitatively what it is you're actually contributing to the article. Cool. Any questions, Kevin, about that?
Yep, there are a couple of questions in here. So one of them, in the past, and this goes back probably at least a year or so ago, at the bottom of the documentation pages, there was a list of issues that had been opened for that particular page. It was incredibly helpful to see discussion on the topic. Why did it go away, and can it come back?
Doesn't ring a bell, honestly. I don't know if we've had something like that. It would be easy enough to search issues for the article in GitHub. GitHub has a pretty good search feature. I think you would be able to find it that way. But I don't think we've ever had a link like that. Not in Docs anyway. Not in Microsoft Docs anyway. I get the idea what you're talking about. I think I've seen that on other sites.
Okay. Next question. So before you edit, do you do a poll of the document first, or how do you go through that process?
Right. So I'm going to walk you through that process if you're using your own tool, and you always want to do like a git pull main to get everything down the latest, and then start editing the latest. When you do it through the website, you are automatically getting the latest version of the article, and you are making your edits in the website automatically. You don't have to worry about that. It keeps your fork up to date for you.
All right, those are the questions. Thank you.
Awesome. So don't be afraid to submit a pull request is the moral of today's story. If you're not sure how it should change, give it a shot. If it's not quite right, if it's not a complete solution, if it's not formatted perfectly, don't worry. You're getting the ball rolling by opening up the pull request, by getting some edits started. We'll take it from there. We'll adjust it. We'll get it fixed. We'll get it published. For images and graphics, charts, etc., we have designers that we use to get images and flowcharts done in a standardized way. So there's no need for us to edit images yourself. You could include a change necessary to an image in the pull request to get that started, along with maybe some other changes, or just open an issue for that kind of thing. Finally, for capitalization, capitalization is tough. SpongeBob font. We get it. The capitalization of various features and products inside Microsoft is one of the more nuanced bits about publishing. Marketing usually wins. Marketing always wins these arguments, regardless of how products documentation evolved throughout the process, even before it went live, before it went to the market, right? Sometimes we get really big pull requests that come through to make a lot of capitalization changes. And they're well-intended, but often they're misguided. The task is tricky enough when you have information directly from inside sources, from marketing, right? And so we like that. We do handle that. We do pay attention to that kind of stuff. Yes, if you spot inconsistencies between marketing content, documentation content, training content, you should know that we're regularly discussing and we're working on that stuff internally. And don't be afraid to point something out. For example, product names and feature names and phrasing are difficult to get just right. And they're trickiest when a generic word is a part of the product's name. So just because we have a product called Azure SQL Database does not mean that every word database is now capitalized. And that's easy to understand. Same thing with managed instance. Same thing with Azure Firewall. Same thing with virtual machines. So now you're trying to get the idea that some of these things, when they're used generically, as far as an instance that a customer has created, it's lowercase. When we're talking about a feature of the product is uppercase. This is tricky. This is even more difficult for our international partners and customers, because capitalization often means that a product or service should be translated in a specific way or not translated at all. But a lowercase common noun, the word database, should be translated, right? So inconsistency in capitalization confuses translators, it confuses customers. It's definitely something that is important to us. It is part of the core goal of our brand voice on Docs, which is above all to be simple and human. So if we can do better to meet that goal, please let us know. So last bit about contributions for localization issues, such as a translation issue, especially in our machine translated localized versions. If you've got a translation issue to raise, those are actually submitted all by email now. This process did change within the last year. So you can download an Outlook email template at this link here, aka.ms/docsitelockfeedback. Submit your feedback then through that email, and there's a template you can use if you want to make bulk suggestions. You can submit your feedback in any language. It will be translated and routed to the correct localization team. If you've got a technical issue with an article and you're most comfortable submitting your issue in another language, no problem. So instead of creating an issue or a pull request using the process that we've talked about and submitting that in English, if you're more comfortable using a different language, you can use the same email template, aka ms.docsitelogfeedback. It will then be translated and passed along to the proper content teams like the database docs team. Either way, thanks for contributing and making Microsoft Docs better for everyone, everywhere. Okay, before I dive into GitHub, any questions about that part?
It looks like no questions at the moment.
Cool. So now that you've seen how you can use GitHub to contribute to Docs, github.com, let's briefly show you some inside baseball, talk about how we use GitHub to host Microsoft documentation. So again, most Microsoft Docs are edited in Markdown. We spend most of our time in Visual Studio Code or Azure Data Studio to edit. We have other tools to help with automated link checking, syntax formatting. We have tools for bulk updates, a series of include files to tokenize things like a product's name. We also have a rich set of metadata for each article, and we do pay attention to how articles perform in terms of SEO, search engine optimization, and traffic patterns and trends, all driven through Azure Analytics and Kusto queries. We are trying to improve poorly performing articles, and we use many metrics to track the performance of an article. For example, if you copy text from an article, that's good. If you do the click or the try it button on a code sample, if how you scroll, how you dwell, look, these are the same metrics that any website uses these days to track the performance of their website, right? To how effective a web page is, all without capturing any personal information or wider tracking information. So most of our decisions on docs and docs layouts and docs features are data driven. And we're driven when we're seeing better engagement, when we have driven better engagement and more useful docs, we try to follow that thread. So for big article updates, we have systems to handle what's called a release branch for when we want to work on documentation for months and months and months at a time and then release a new product all at once, like during the keynote of the Ignite conference. Many of these strategies aren't far off from what developers use to release their software all at once. And so we use the same tools. Happy to answer any questions about that, but moving on to some basics of GitHub. So this is the behind the scenes and how Microsoft Docs uses GitHub, where all Microsoft documentation is managed. If you're new to Git and you don't understand this, don't worry, all this is managed for you, but you might be interested in the basics of the GitHub workflow, or really just the Git workflow at this point. So a repository like Microsoft Docs / Azure Docs. So Microsoft Docs is the organization. Azure Docs is actually the name of the repository. This is where the source is housed and where the website engine pulls the markdown files to present you the live article in the website. A fork is a copy of the repo associated to your account in GitHub. So I have a fork of the Azure Docs repo. Everybody on my team has a fork of the Azure Docs repo. Anybody who's contributed has a fork of the Azure Docs repo, right? So to tell the two apart, a common convention is to reference your remote fork, the fork that exists up in GitHub as origin. This is the one that belongs to you. And the code base you eventually push to as upstream. These are called remote names or just the remotes. And these are a common naming convention. You can actually choose any name you want. You'll have an origin and an upstream for every repository you work in. And you'll actually see in the case of SQL Docs that our docs are spanned over two repos, SQL Docs and Azure Docs. So then a clone is a copy of a fork that's brought down locally to your workstation. The files are physically copied to your workstation so that you can make edits there offline on your workstation. Then when you go to make changes to a file or to add or remove files, you'll create what's called a working branch that is relevant to the chunk of changes that you will be making. So you want a branch to contain only the changes to a specific feature or an issue that you're addressing so that it can be treated as an atomic block of changes to go back up the stream. You don't want a branch to contain too much. It'll get hang up on one thing and everything else will be prevented, right? So your work goes into the branch, and here the branch is just like fix issue or whatever with an ISO date. And when you're done making your changes, first you will commit the branch locally to your own clone of the workstation. At this point, your work is entirely within your machine. Microsoft has no idea, GitHub has no idea any of the changes you have made. Then you will push a branch and all the commits in the branch, and a branch can have many commits for many files, to your origin in github.com, the fork of the code in your GitHub account. Now, GitHub has your changes. They are in the cloud, but Microsoft still has no idea of any of the changes that you've made. Then finally, you issue a pull request asking Microsoft Docs, asking that repository, asking that branch to accept commits from your branch, from your repository, so that your changes can be merged from your fork into the repo's main branch. That's it. That's the basic stuff. Now, to be a little more accurate to the complexity of how it is in real life, we actually have two repositories in the Microsoft Docs account for every repository. The Azure Docs repository drives the website. It's for the public. But like true professionals internally, we don't develop against production. We only develop against a preview repository, the -PR repository, and these are not visible to the public. This allows us to work in and preview the merge state of our changes across the entire site. And there's a website underneath that runs the entire thing and shows us what it would actually look like live. And this build process from the live website occurs then twice a day. It pushes from the preview repository into the real thing. And that itself is gated by a team of build reviewers. But when you submit pull requests, it all happens inside the Azure Docs repository, inside the public repository. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff about the preview repository. All the validation that's necessary occurs inside the public Azure Docs repository. And again, this same Docs as code pattern applies to any Microsoft technology, all the repos in Microsoft Docs. If you are interested in learning anything more about Git or GitHub, there's some really good stuff on Microsoft Learn here, some resources on understanding this, including how to use Git in Visual Studio Code, which is what we do every day. Any questions on Git, GitHub, all that behind the scenes, inside baseball stuff, Kevin?
Looks like no questions so far, but again, if you have questions, drop them in chat. I will forward them along.
Well, cool. Let me go through a few like new things, announcements, and then I'm wide open for questions on any topic, really. Microsoft Docs related. So, what's new? So, in February, so just under a year ago, we rolled this out, and it's actually changed a couple times since then because again, we have responded to the data. We introduced a dynamic recommended content in the footer at the very bottom of many Microsoft Docs articles. And you're probably used to it at this point, but many of the links in this content, or rather, the links in this content are determined by a machine learning solution based on a model that describes customer behaviors within our documentation set. And we have seen some really positive metrics on tracking traffic to these machine recommended files so far. So we think these are helping people find what they need. One more thing. This is new to Docs. You can add your certifications to your Docs login by connecting your certification profile from Microsoft Learn. So you can go to your profile and Learn or Docs to get there, go to certifications, and then click on the Connect Certification profile. This is a permanent connection. And you can get notifications then about your certification, your exams, your renewals, and a lot more. And you can link directly to Pearson VUE to schedule the exams that you're pursuing. That's new just in the last few months. And hey, at this point, I'm wide open. You can find our team on Twitter at SQL Docs. You can say hi to us with that hashtag. It'll sure to get our attention. And at this point, I'm open to any kind of questions y'all have. And thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, William. So if you were interested, or if somebody were interested in getting started, but they don't really know, like, oh, I don't know what page I want to update. I don't know. They might have some information, but just don't quite know where to begin. Where would be a good place to start? Like the issues for docs, there are so many of them. So it's hard to say, oh, I know about that topic and could update something when there's several hundred issues.
Let me talk about that too. So a couple things there. Yes, you could look at issues and decide to act on another customer's issue by creating a pull request to resolve it. You could do that. That's not typically how our customers engage. We don't really ask them to go headhunt issues for us. We'd be happy to. We've seen customers replying to each other's issues at times, especially if like someone creates an issue or a pull request and they put it on social media and other people in the community go and check it out and respond to it. And we've seen some really productive conversations happen that way. But you don't need to go to issues like you would in an open source project and start resolving those for the developers. That's not necessarily our ask. We'd welcome it. That's fine. That's not necessarily our ask. What I would recommend you do if you're trying to look for a way to contribute would be to go to the stuff that you know best. Right? So let's say you have recently been dealing with replication a whole bunch, or you've been playing with availability groups, or you've been setting up temporary tables, stuff like that. Take a look at those docs, right? You'll have read them recently. You'll be most familiar with what it's talking about. If you find anything from a basic typo or punctuation issue to like a formatting issue in something like that, to something that could be helpful. Maybe something's not wrong, but maybe, hey, you really needed this one DMV to fix this problem, and it would have been nice to have mentioned it earlier. It would have saved you some time clicking around. That's a great pull request, and that's a great first contribution, is to say, hey, I needed this to fix this. It would be great to have a little note right here that says, if this, then that, something like this, go check out this DMV. And if you need help putting a link in the DMV, we can handle all that too with a relative link to the right article. That'd be a great idea for a first contribution. But again, I would go to something that you're familiar with technology-wise, something that you've been playing with, fixing and breaking, right? Or breaking and fixing, if that's the way you prefer to do it. That'd be a great first way to do your first contribution. And when you get a PR in for your first time, that one PR will have a little tag that says first-time contributor. And we really like to tackle those. We really like to congratulate people on those kind of things too.
Sounds good. Doesn't look like there are any other questions in chat.
Cool. Well, look, thanks, Triangle. I appreciate it. Good luck in March Madness. I assume all of you will either hate or cheer for one team in that whole thing. I'm trying to pander to the local audience here by talking about college basketball. My LSU Tigers are actually pretty good this year, so maybe they'll be in the dance too. Otherwise, non-sports related, y'all have a great time. I think y'all got some pretty cold weather recently. We know all about that up here in Seattle too, so hang in there. Being from Louisiana, y'all got some pretty good snow.
Got our inch of snow.
Nice. We got 4 inches of snow the day after Christmas, and me being from Louisiana, I had never shoveled snow before, but I can now put that on the list of things I have done. That was not fun.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Have a good evening, everybody. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Thank you. And we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about Microsoft Docs and how it gets better. So with that, we're going to wrap up for this evening. Thanks, everybody in chat, and we'll see you next week for the Data Science and Business Intelligence meeting. Until then, everyone, have a great evening and take care.